daughter-in-law forged my late wife's signature on a quitclaim deed. I found out by accident on a Tuesday afternoon while looking for an old tax return. I didn't say a word to anyone. 3 weeks later, I handed her a manila folder at the dinner table. She assumed it was paperwork to sign the house over to them. She was already reaching for a pen when she saw what was actually inside. Before we go any further, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one. I was 64 years old, and I still had Helen's reading glasses on the nightstand. 8 months after she passed, I hadn't moved them. Some things you leave where they are because moving them feels like agreeing that the person is really gone. I retired from the post office in 2019. 31 years as a carrier, the last 12 as a supervisor out of the distribution center in Naperville, Illinois. I know that doesn't sound glamorous. It wasn't, but I was good at it. I had my pension coming in at around $2,200 a month. I owned the house outright, and I had a small brokerage account. Helen and I had built over 25 years of brown bag lunches and sensible cars. Not rich. Comfortable. There's a difference, and I'd learned to appreciate it. My son Robbie was 37. He worked in IT sales, made decent money when the economy cooperated, which lately it hadn't. He met his wife, Cassandra, at a company holiday party about 6 years before all this happened. I tried to like her from the start. I genuinely did. She had this quality, though, where she'd ask you a question and before you finished answering, her eyes would drift somewhere else. Like she was already calculating the next thing she needed from you. Helen saw it before I did. She never said it plainly. That wasn't her way. But after Sunday dinners, once Robbie and Cassandra had driven off, Helen would rinse the dishes and say things like, "She's very focused, isn't she?" Or, "I wonder sometimes if Robbie knows what he wants." I'd grunt something and she'd let it go. She always let things go with grace. That was one of the many things I didn't deserve about her. Helen died of a cerebral hemorrhage in October. Here one morning, gone by afternoon. The kind of death that doesn't give you a speech or a goodbye. Just a phone call from a nurse I'd never met, and then the long drive to a hospital where my wife was already past hearing my voice. The grief is its own story. I won't go into all of it. What matters here is that Cassandra showed up at that hospital with a notepad. I didn't register it at the time. I thought she was taking notes to help with arrangements. She was attentive, solicitous, brought food to the house for 2 weeks straight, coordinated with a funeral home, handled the thank you cards. I was grateful. I said so. I even told Robbie that Cassandra had really shown up when it counted, and I meant it. It was February, 4 months later, when I found the first thing that didn't add up. I was going through a box of papers in the home office. The kind of box that accumulates when you're married for 38 years. Insurance documents, old W-2s, property tax notices, a birthday card from 1997 that somehow survived every purge. I was looking for a specific form, a beneficiary designation I thought I'd updated in 2018. Couldn't find it anywhere. I pulled everything out, spread it across the desk. At the bottom of the box was a document I didn't recognize. It was a quitclaim deed for the house. The property at our address, transferred from my name and Helen's name jointly to Robbie and Cassandra's names. Dated September 28th, 3 weeks before Helen died. My hands went cold. Helen's signature was on line 2. I stared at it for a long time. I know my wife's handwriting the way I know her voice. The loop in the H. The way she crossed her T's slightly above the stem. A habit from elementary school she never shook. This signature had the shape of her name, but not the weight of her hand. Something about the pressure was off. The pen strokes were too deliberate, like someone who'd practiced. I sat down on the edge of the desk chair and didn't move for maybe 10 minutes. Then I put the document back exactly where I found it, went to the kitchen and made a cup of coffee I didn't drink. I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was more like the sensation you get when you're driving and something appears in your headlights that your brain takes a second to identify. That suspended instant before you know whether to brake or swerve. I just sat there in that moment, not moving, trying to understand what I was looking at. The next morning, I called a lawyer named Dwight Calloway. I'd met him years before through the union. He did some labor law work and had a small general practice in Wheaton. We'd had a beer together maybe 4 times over the years. He was direct and not cheap, but not theatrical about it. I told him what I found. He was quiet for a moment. Do you still have it? I put it back in the box. Good. Don't move it, don't mention it to anyone. Can you come in Thursday? I went in Thursday with the document in a clear plastic sleeve I'd found in the office supply drawer. Dwight looked at it carefully. He photographed every page, front and back. He asked me several questions about Helen's condition in late September, whether she'd been having any cognitive issues, whether she'd ever discussed wanting to transfer the property, whether I knew of any notary by the name printed at the bottom of the page. I answered no, and no. The notary stamp, he said, is registered to a Tina Borowski in Lombard. I'll have someone check whether she actually witnessed this. He looked at me the way lawyers look at you when the news isn't good, but is useful. If this is what it appears to be, someone forged your wife's signature on a property transfer and had it notarized, either with a corrupt notary or a forged stamp. That's deed fraud. It's a felony in Illinois. I drove home very carefully. I obeyed every traffic law. What I didn't do was call my son. The hardest part of the next 3 weeks was sitting across from Robbie and Cassandra at Sunday dinner like nothing had happened. Cassandra made lasagna 1 week, asked about my blood pressure the next. She refilled my water glass without being asked. She had this way of being attentive that I now understood differently than I had before. She wasn't kind. She was strategic. Dwight called on a Wednesday. The notary, Tina Borowski, had no record of ever being contacted for a real estate transaction in September. Her stamp had been used without her knowledge. When Dwight reached her, she was shocked and immediately cooperative. She hadn't notarized anything for private clients in over a year due to a hand injury. So someone took her stamp, I said. Or a reproduction of it. It's not difficult if you know where to look. I asked him what my options were. You can report this to the DuPage County State's Attorney. That triggers a criminal investigation. Or you can pursue it civilly. Or both. I'd recommend both. But Harlan, and here he paused, you need to understand that your son may be implicated. I've been sitting with that possibility for 3 weeks already. I know, I said. That night I called my daughter, Marisol. She's 39, lives in Indianapolis, works as a school administrator. She and Cassandra had always kept a polite distance, the kind that exists between two people who have nothing in common but one person they both love. I told her everything. There was a long silence. Dad, are you sure? I'm sure. Another silence. Does Robbie know? That's what I don't know. I heard her exhale slowly. What do you need me to do? That's my daughter. That's always been her first question. I asked her to come the following weekend, not to say anything to Robbie beforehand, and to bring her old laptop because I didn't want to use mine in case anyone thought to check later. She drove up Saturday morning, and we sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours going through everything Dwight had sent me. The title records, the notary verification, a comparison of Helen's authentic signatures pulled from tax returns and bank documents side by side with the deed. Marisol is not an emotional person in the way that shows, but she set down the comparison sheet after a minute and pressed both palms flat on the table and just breathed. She did this 4 weeks before Mom died, she said. The date on the deed is September 28th. Mom went into the hospital October 19th. She was already sick in September. The headaches. She didn't tell anyone how bad they were. I nodded. We'd talked about this already, on the phone. Helen had been having severe headaches for a couple of months and had an MRI scheduled for early November that she never made it to. She hadn't told the kids because she didn't want to worry them. She'd told me, and I'd taken her to one GP appointment where they'd called it tension headaches and suggested she reduce stress. I blame myself for not pushing harder. I'll carry that. If Cassandra knew Mom was sick, Marisol said slowly, she would have wanted the house in her name before Mom was gone, before you had time to think clearly. The way she said it, clinical, methodical, like she was working through a proof. And if Mom died and the deed was already filed, I said, then the transfer would have happened while Helen was still alive. Legally cleaner. We sat with that for a moment. Dad, did Robbie know she was sick before the rest of us? I thought about it. Cassandra might have. She had a habit of going through the mail when they visited. Marisol opened her laptop. I need to see the filing date on the deed. When was it recorded with the county? November 3rd, 15 days after Helen went into the hospital. 2 days before she died. My daughter closed the laptop lid and didn't say anything for a while. Then, she filed it while Mom was in the hospital. Yes. She waited until Mom couldn't object. Yes. We sat at that kitchen table in the house my wife and I had lived in for 26 years, and we didn't speak for a while. The refrigerator hummed. A car went past outside. Normal afternoon sounds that felt surreal against what we were sitting with. I made sandwiches. We ate. We kept talking. Dwight filed the criminal complaint the following Monday. He also filed a civil action to quiet title, which is the legal process for challenging ownership of real property. The quitclaim deed was flagged by the county recorder's office as under investigation, which meant the transfer couldn't be completed or leveraged until the matter was resolved. Cassandra didn't know any of this yet. Robbie called me that Thursday to say they were thinking of refinancing and the bank had flagged something unusual with the title search. He didn't sound alarmed, just puzzled. I told him I wasn't sure what they might have found and suggested he talk to his lender. I felt terrible lying to my son. I want to say that clearly. I still feel it now. That specific guilt of withholding something from a person you raised. But Dwight had been explicit. If Robbie told Cassandra before the criminal referral was officially active, she could attempt to destroy evidence. The phone. Documents. Whatever she had that showed the process of how she'd done it. I had to wait. The week before, I was supposed to bring them both to Sunday dinner. Marisol was going to drive up. Dwight said we could have someone from the state's attorney's office call Cassandra directly the following Monday morning. I was at the Jewel-Osco on 75th when I ran into my neighbor, Paulette. She's 71, retired pharmacist, has lived 3 houses down since before Robbie was born. Helen used to call her every Saturday morning. Paulette asked how I was holding up. I said fine. She said she was glad, then added, in the way people do when they're not quite sure if they should say a thing. I saw Cassandra here a few weeks ago. She was at the pharmacy counter for a while. I didn't want to intrude. She paused. She had a notary stamp with her. I thought that was an unusual thing to carry to a grocery store. I kept my face neutral. When was this? Oh, late September maybe. I remembered because I'd just gotten back from my sister's in Minnesota. I called Dwight from the parking lot. That's your corroborating witness, he said. Someone who can place her with the stamp at a specific time and location. Get me her full name and contact information. Paulette agreed immediately. She'd liked Helen enormously, and she didn't like Cassandra, though she'd always been too polite to say so plainly. The Sunday dinner I planned didn't go the way I'd imagined it. Life rarely cooperates with the scenario you've rehearsed. Cassandra called Friday afternoon to say Robbie had a work thing. Could they come next week instead? I said, of course. No problem at all. I spent that Saturday organizing documents at the kitchen table with Marisol on FaceTime and went to bed at 9. The Monday call from the investigator's office happened without them being there for Sunday dinner first. It happened on a weekday at their house in Carroll Stream when Robbie was at the office. Cassandra called me 40 minutes after the investigator left. Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. The smoothness was gone. Harlan, what did you do? Not a question. A sentence with a period at the end. What did I do? I said. I found something and I reported it. You don't understand what you started. I understand exactly what I've started. She told me I was making a terrible mistake, that the deed had been a misunderstanding, that Helen had discussed it with her, that she was going to make sure I regretted this. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finally stopped, I said, "There's a folder waiting for you and Robbie at Sunday dinner next week. I'd like you both to come." She hung up. Robbie called at 8 that night. His voice was the voice of a man who'd spent several hours being told 2 different stories about his father and his wife, and didn't know which one to believe. I recognized it because I'd heard it in myself back in February when I first pulled that document from the box. Dad, is it true? Did you really report her to the state's attorney? Come to dinner Sunday, both of you. I'll explain everything. She's saying you're having some kind of episode, that you've been confused since Mom died. I absorbed that. Robbie, you know me. A long pause. Sunday, he said finally. They came on Sunday. Marisol was already at the house when they pulled up. I'd watched from the front window as Cassandra sat in the passenger seat of their Accord for a full minute before getting out. Robbie came in first. He hugged me, stiff and uncertain. Cassandra walked past me into the kitchen without making eye contact. We sat at the dining room table. I'd set it properly the way Helen used to. Placemats, cloth napkins, the good water glasses. It seemed important to do it right. I put the folder in the center of the table. Robbie opened it. Cassandra watched him, not the folder. The first page was the quitclaim deed. The second was the comparison of signatures, Helen's authentic signatures alongside the one on the deed, prepared by a forensic document examiner Dwight had retained. The third was Paulette's written statement. The fourth was the notary's statement. The fifth was the county recorder's date stamp showing the deed was filed November 3rd, while Helen was in the hospital. Robbie went through them slowly. He's not a fast reader when he's upset. He looked at the signature comparison for a long time. Cassandra reached for the folder and he moved it away from her. Just slightly, without looking up. One of the most telling things I've ever seen. When he finished, he set the pages down and didn't speak for a moment. His jaw was working. I recognize that, too. The house, he said finally. You were trying to take Dad's house. Cassandra started talking. The version she gave involved Helen calling her privately, asking her to help protect the property from what she called probate complications. Being too proud to mention it to me. Trusting Cassandra as a daughter-in-law to handle it quietly. It was a detailed story. She'd clearly rehearsed it. When she finished, Robbie looked at her for a long time. Then he said, Mom hated probate complications. She had a trust in 2 conversations with an estate attorney. She would never have done this without Dad. The quiet that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard since the hospital. Cassandra pushed back from the table and went to the living room. Robbie stayed at the table. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and I sat there and let him take whatever time he needed. How long have you known? He asked. Since February. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't know how much you knew. I had to find out first. He nodded slowly. I don't think he liked that answer. I'm not sure I liked it either. But it was the truth. The criminal case moved faster than Dwight had expected. Cassandra retained her own attorney, who argued she'd acted on verbal instructions from Helen. The notary and Paulette's testimony closed that door. The forensic document examiner's report closed the door further. In December, 18 months after Helen's death, Cassandra was charged with forgery, deed fraud, and fraudulent misrepresentation. 2 felonies and 1 Class A misdemeanor under Illinois law. She pled down in March. 3 years probation, no incarceration, mandatory restitution of legal costs, and a permanent record. The deed was voided. The house remained mine. I didn't feel triumphant when it was over. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something quieter and more tired. Like the way you feel at the end of a very long project. Not happy exactly, just relieved that it's no longer in front of you. Robbie filed for divorce in January, 2 months before the plea. He didn't tell me he'd made the decision until after he'd already talked to an attorney. That was his right. I wasn't going to weigh in on his marriage even after everything. He moved back into his old room for about 6 weeks while he found an apartment, and we ate dinner together most nights without discussing anything complicated. We watched baseball. We talked about his job, ordinary things. One night in February, he asked me if I thought he should have known. If he'd missed signs. I thought about it. I don't think she let you see them, I said. That's different from not looking. He nodded, didn't seem fully convinced. Maybe he'll get there. Marisol calls every Sunday morning. She started doing it right after Helen died, and she hasn't stopped. We talk for maybe 40 minutes about nothing urgent, her kids, her school district, whatever I've been reading, whatever's on the news. She never says she calls because she's worried about me being alone in this house. But we both know that's part of it, and neither of us needs to say it. The house is quiet now in ways it wasn't when Helen was alive. I've gotten used to a certain amount of quiet. I moved her reading glasses to the dresser drawer in April, not throwing them away, just not leaving them on the nightstand anymore. It felt like the right time. The title to the house is in my name again. The trust Helen and I set up is intact. The brokerage account, which Cassandra had apparently also begun researching. Dwight found evidence she'd been gathering information about it, though she hadn't yet taken any action, is untouched. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't been looking for that tax form on a Tuesday afternoon. If the box had stayed closed for another year, or 2, or 5. By then, the statute of limitations on civil fraud would have been running. The notary might have moved or forgotten. Paulette might not have remembered the detail about the stamp. The house would have been theirs, not in some technical, legal sense, literally theirs. My address, my yard, the kitchen where Helen made her coffee every morning, the room where Marisol and Robbie grew up. Gone. I got a card from Paulette last Christmas. Just a regular card, one of those generic ones with a candle and some holly. She'd written inside, "Glad you found what you were looking for, Harlan. Helen would have too." I read that a few times, set it on the mantel next to Helen's photo. I'm not a man who cries easily, never have been. But I stood there at that mantel for a while. There's a right way to handle the things people try to take from you. It isn't fast, and it isn't clean, and it costs more than just money. But you handle it. You document everything. You find people who tell the truth, and you don't let anyone talk you into walking away from what belongs to you. Or worse, from what belongs to the memory of someone you love. If you liked this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if this resonates with you, if you've been through something like this, I'd like to hear about it. Click the video on the left for the next story. I keep coming back to the Tuesday afternoon I found that document. Not the courtroom, not the day the plea came through. Just that ordinary Tuesday, a cardboard box, a tax form I couldn't locate, and a piece of paper at the bottom that changed everything. That's where the story really started. Not with anything dramatic, but with paying attention. I've thought a lot about what made the difference between losing that house and keeping it. It wasn't luck, exactly. It was that I didn't act on emotion first. When I pulled that deed out of the box and recognized that the signature wasn't Helen's, my first instinct was to pick up the phone and confront someone. I didn't. I put the document back, made coffee, and sat with what I knew before I did anything. That pause, that one decision to go slow when everything in me wanted to go fast, is what gave me any chance at all. If I'd called my son that afternoon, Cassandra would have had time. Time to destroy evidence, to prepare a story, to turn Robbie against the process before it even started. The restraint wasn't weakness. It was the most important thing I did. What I've learned, at 64, after 31 years with the post office and 38 years of marriage, is that doing right by people and doing the smart thing are not always separate decisions. Cassandra assumed I was grieving too hard to think straight. She assumed that an old man, 3 months after losing his wife, would be too emotionally compromised to notice a forged signature, or too conflict-averse to act on it. She mistook my quietness for confusion. That's a mistake people make about older men sometimes. We've learned to be still. Still isn't the same as absent. Robbie asked me once, during those weeks he was staying here, whether I blamed myself for not seeing who she was sooner. I told him the truth. I'd seen signs. I'd chosen not to look directly at them because I wanted my son to be happy and I didn't want to be the father who made things harder. That was my failure, and I own it. Being a decent person doesn't mean you stop paying attention. It means you hold both things. The desire to give people the benefit of the doubt, and the obligation to see what's actually in front of you. Marisol drives up most months now. We eat at the kitchen table, same table where I spread those documents out, same table where Cassandra reached for a pen that Sunday, and then went still when she saw what was actually in that folder. The table's just a table again. That's how it should be. Helen's photo is still on the mantel. She didn't get to see any of this resolved. That's the part that sits heaviest with me. Not the legal process, not even the forgery itself, but that she died not knowing. That someone looked at her while she was sick and calculated. That her trust was the instrument of the thing. You can't always protect the people you love from what happens after they're gone. But you can make sure the truth comes out. You can be patient enough to build a case, honest enough to face what it costs, and stubborn enough to see it through even when your son is in the other room, not sure what to believe. That combination, doing what's right, thinking clearly, and refusing to quit, is the only thing that actually works. I've seen enough of life now to say that with some confidence. Paulette's card is still on the mantel, next to Helen's photo. I leave it there.